Welcome to worship with Christ Church of Fort Thomas, Kentucky. My name is Edward Good, and I'm grateful that you are joining us wherever you might be. Our guiding statement as a congregation is that we embrace all as we journey the way of Jesus. So as I share most weeks with this, we embrace you wherever you might be, both physically as well as wherever you might be in your spiritual journey. As a part of the United Church of Christ, we also acknowledge and embrace the statement of our larger denomination that says no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. And so we welcome you today. We are coming towards the end of the season of Lent. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday, the beginning of Holy Week. And during that week, we will have multiple opportunities for you, both in person as well as online, for going deeper during that Holy Week leading up to Easter. We will have some online ways that you can go through the Stations of the Cross, as well as pray labyrinths, different forms of prayer during that week. And in person, we will be partnering with First Presbyterian here in Fort Thomas to offer a time to pray and walk a physical labyrinth at First Presbyterian, and we'll have more information about that next week. We will have an in-person service on Maundy Thursday that will kind of cover both Maundy Thursday and the events of Good Friday, and that will be at 7 o'clock on Maundy Thursday, so a week from this coming Thursday. That service will be here at Christ Church. So those will remind you as we get a little closer. The other thing is you can find a link on our website if you wanted to order Easter flowers in honor or a recognition of somebody in your life. And so that form is available online for you if you'd like to fill that out and have some flowers that will brighten up the sanctuary for Easter Sunday. So wherever you might be today, we pray that God meets you in a very special and a very powerful way as we worship together. Our scripture reading on this last Sunday before Palm Sunday is a very long reading. It's actually the entirety of John chapter 11. I'm not going to read the whole thing today, but I encourage you to maybe pause this and go and read that whole chapter, because really it's one story that is all together, and it's hard to just pull out one piece out of it. And so, again, maybe pause it, read the whole thing. I am going to read one section of it that's really going to be about the center of the message today, but just know there's a lot more of what this is. This is the story of a friend of Jesus named Lazarus who dies, and Jesus goes, when he gets to the tomb where Lazarus has been, he is able to raise Lazarus from the dead. And there's a lot that goes along with it. But we're going to be reading specifically from John chapter 11, verses 28 through 37. So listen to God's word for us today. When Martha had said this to Jesus, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village of Bethany, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were there with her in her house were consoling her, and they saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Same thing, actually, that her sister said earlier in the passage. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and was deeply moved. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could he who opened the eyes of the blind man, could he not have kept this man from dying?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This thing called preaching is kind of a weird gig. On the one hand, it's kind of simple. It's just writing a speech every week, 10 to 20 minutes. But if that's all that it is, that's all I think of it that way. If that's how I think of it, if that's how another pastor thinks of it, well, then we're doing it wrong. Because to share a message in a worship service, something like this that we're doing, requires a person to be sensitive. Sensitive to the speakings and the leadings of God's Spirit, and sensitive to the needs of the community and the congregation where we are. So it's more than just a speech. It's more than just looking at a part of the Bible and giving a whole bunch of factual information. It's trying to discern, what is God saying? What does God want a congregation, a community to hear? Or what do they need to hear? So this week, as I started on Monday to really work with these readings, this long reading from John chapter 11, as I read over it multiple times on Monday, I kept having questions coming up for me of different things, from just like the mundane of, how did Lazarus was wrapped up in a burial cloth? How did he get up and start walking out of the tomb? How did that happen? Or the deeper questions, the hows and the whys of it. And I thought, if I've got all these questions, then my guess is probably other people have these questions as well. So I put out an email to the congregation and said, what questions arise for you? And the original plan for the sermon was I was going to do sort of like question, response, and kind of do that through the message. But something else was stirring, and that was that more than half the questions that I got back really had to do with one thing: grief and loss. And on Wednesday and on Thursday, we had 2 more members of our congregation pass away. Which means that just not even in the first 3 months, full 3 months of this year, we have had 7 members of our congregation pass away. Last year we had 5 the entire year. In addition to that, I personally have participated in 2 other funerals outside this congregation. And it really just spoke to me that grief is right here with us in a very real way. And not just with those that I've named and mentioned already, but when I think of the people in our community of faith here, I think of people who have lost siblings, others who have lost parents, some who have lost dear, close friends. And this week I look back, as I often do in my journal, of what I've written in this week and past years. 3 years ago this week was when Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio issued the first shelter-in-place order around COVID-19. And it got me thinking about all the grief that came out of that. Not just the millions of people who died worldwide, but the grief over what has taken place all around us. The brokenness, the division, the hurt, the things that we lost that we were looking forward to during those years. All of it. Grief it's here. And it's on us. And really, it's really at the center, almost quite literally, of this story. Almost in exactly the middle of all of this is this singular verse that's one of the shortest, but yet maybe one of the most powerful verses in all of the Bible. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. But why? That was one of the questions that did come up. Why was Jesus weeping? Why was Jesus crying at that moment? What was Jesus grieving there? Now, the gospel writer doesn't tell us that. The writer doesn't say Jesus wept because da. And so really all we can do is kind of speculate, maybe look back at what was before and think about what we know of Jesus. Maybe why would Jesus have been weeping at that moment and grieving at that moment? Maybe Jesus had gotten to that point and he'd heard Mary and Martha both say that same thing of, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus looked at all that was going on, saw the finality of death, the stone that was there in front of the tomb, the people mourning and grieving, hearing those words from dear friends Mary and Martha about his dear friend Lazarus. And Jesus maybe knew that he could have done something. I mean, when you read the beginning of the story, it's kind of an odd thing that happens. Beginning of our story, Jesus is some distance away from Bethany. We don't know exactly where, but someone comes with a message that your friend Lazarus is sick. And Jesus makes this statement there that is, this illness does not lead to death. And yet Lazarus dies. It says that Jesus and the disciples stayed there 2 days more. Did Jesus make a mistake? Now you might be saying, wait, did the preacher just say, did Jesus make a mistake? I mean, doesn't the Bible or doesn't Christian theology say that Jesus was perfect? Well, some do. But most simply say that Jesus was without sin. Mistakes aren't necessarily sinful. I mean, if we say that Jesus never made a mistake, that means that Jesus never woke up in the middle of the night and stubbed his foot on a rock or a piece of furniture or something like that. It means that Jesus never went right instead of going left when they were traveling somewhere. It means that Jesus didn't measure twice, instead just measured once, and well, then that cut on that piece of wood in the carpenter shop wasn't the right length. Did Jesus make a mistake? Did Jesus think, I think Lazarus will be fine. Lazarus has been sick before. He's pulled himself through. We'll go in a couple days. If that's the case, maybe what Jesus is feeling as he gets there to Bethany and he sees all of this is that regret. Oh, I could have done something. Think about people in your life that you've lost. How many of us have people who there were things we wished we had said and didn't get the chance or chose not to say when we could have? And then when that finality of death has come, there's nothing we can do. Have you ever had that experience? I have. Maybe some of what Jesus is grieving at that moment, what Jesus is weeping about at that moment, is that very thing. And it's okay to think that. Jesus was fully human and fully divine. As we say, Christian theology, it seems to me that Jesus could have made a mistake. The other thing is that Jesus might have been feeling. It might have been both. It might have been one or the other. It might have been both. It might have been something else entirely. But one of the other things that Jesus could have been feeling is just the fact that he's lost a friend. The Gospels paint a picture of Jesus having a really unique relationship with this family, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, these three siblings. It doesn't go into the details of why or what the friendship was about, but there was something special and powerful between them. And so when Jesus comes there, again, sees the finality of death, knows that his friend Lazarus is wrapped up in a burial cloth in a tomb with the stone rolled over, and it's been 4 days. Jesus is feeling the pain of loss. Something that all of us at different points in our life have felt. And even though Jesus knows that, yes, he can do something about it, and he will, as we read further on in this, right there, there's the pain of loss. And I mentioned before about the fully human, fully divine aspect of Jesus. I got to believe that if Jesus is fully human, just like us, that Jesus would weep at the loss of someone he loved, just as we do. Now, I don't know about you, but I would rather believe in a God who feels what we feel, who isn't just out there distant, far away from all of this, but one who can feel empathy and can feel the joy when there's a celebration in life, and can weep and grieve when there's pain. And in fact, as I read the stories of the Bible, that's what I see over and over again in Jesus and in God in general, that God does feel. And often it's feeling exactly what we feel. And as Jesus does say to Martha before this, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. It's a promise that Jesus gives. But before Lazarus is raised, Jesus weeps. And that speaks to me that as we grieve losses in our lives, as we grieve the losses of people in our congregation, just this year, Lois Gore and Ginny Kissel, Bob Derby, Betty Deller, Bonnie Hitch, Jim Gracie, and Jim Parrott, as we grieve their losses, as we weep, that Jesus weeps with us. As we grieve those other losses in our lives, whether they're people who have been close to us, who've passed away in recent weeks, or people who passed away in years past, or we grieve the other losses that are present in our lives. Jesus weeps with us. And yes, there's the promise of what can be transformed out of that. But first know that Jesus weeps with you. Grace, peace, love, and joy as we remember that truth, that we are not alone. Amen.